Hey guys, Benjamin Albright, NFL Underground. I want to talk to you today about Phantom Football Forum. Designed to give you greater access to me. You get the latest intel, insider information, rumors, notes, injury information, Vegas, line, fantasy football, power rankings. Watch football games live with me. Phantom Football Forum. Only $1 for your first month if you sign up today. Facebook.com/WatchPhantom. Link right here. Come join us today.
What's going on, everybody? Just after noon, right here on Phantom, the New World Order of Sports Media. I'm Ari Temkin, with you until about 1 o'clock Central. And we're streaming live on all the digital platforms. The New World Order of Sports Media Phantom coming to you on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Periscope, wherever you are. In the digital world, we are delivering sports, live sports content. So make sure to like us on Twitter at Watch Phantom, on Instagram at Phantom Sports, on Facebook at Facebook.com/Watch Phantom, on YouTube at Watch Phantom. Just wherever you are, we are. So make sure to like our pages and make sure to subscribe as well. All right. Yesterday we talked for about an hour about Kawhi Leonard. The plan is to do the exact same thing. But I want to remind everybody that all next week, Monday through Friday, I'm going to be doing this show live pretty close to the spot behind me, actually, though it's not actually physically, literally behind me right now. But I'll be at the Ticket Sports Pub all next week, Monday through Friday at noon. Reminder that the World Cup semis are going to be Tuesday and Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So come out to the Ticket Sports Pub Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Come hang out with me from 12 to 1. I'll be doing the show live out there at the Ticket Sports Pub in downtown San Antonio on Houston Street, right by the Alamo. So come say hello. It's my final week in San Antonio before I move, so come say your goodbyes. Also working on some guests, perhaps some former co-hosts of mine at the radio station. If you could, read between the lines a little bit as far as who I'm trying to work on to get out, David Chancellor and Antonio Daniels, out to the Ticket Sports Pub at some point next week. But make plans to join me from 12 to 1, Ticket Sports Pub, downtown San Antonio, right by the Alamo. My final week at San Antonio, so come hang out, say hello, share some memories, have a beer, and watch. And then let's stick around and watch the semifinals on Tuesday and Wednesday of the World Cup. So it's perfect. Watch Showtime at noon. The World Cup semifinals start on Tuesday and Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So come watch at the Ticket Sports Pub on Houston Street in downtown San Antonio. All right, make sure to hit the share button. No matter where you're watching from, and I want to appreciate everybody, whether it be the folks watching on Facebook at Facebook.com/Watch Phantom, or if you're watching on the Ari Temkin radio page, or if you're watching around the association radio page. Thanks to Danny Thompson, a partner of ours with Phantom over there, and then, of course, in the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page as well. So post your comments. We have an hour-long discussion on Kawhi Leonard, so buckle up because there's a lot to get to thanks to a good friend of mine in Mike Wright, who went public with some interesting stories to give you a little bit of insight of what's exactly been going on between Kawhi Leonard, his uncle Dennis, his agent, and the San Antonio Spurs. David Alejandre says Melo to Golden State for $5 million. I saw that the Thunder are working on a buyout for Melo. The reports, at least early on, indicate not Golden State, David, but rather Houston or LA. And people might be laughing at that. To me, LA would make some sense in the pick and roll game with LeBron. I don't know. I mean, I think certainly either Houston or LA seems to be the favorites, and it all makes sense to me. So, and post your comments. I'll get to all of them here throughout the broadcast, no matter where you're watching on Twitch, on YouTube, on Facebook, no matter where you are, we are. All right. So here's what I want to know from you, the good people watching this, the majority of which I'm guessing are Spurs fans. What, in your estimation, what's the best case scenario outcome here? Based on all the information we've gotten over the last 10 months, which if you can trace it all the way back to he suffers the injury. There's rumors throughout the summer that he's not going to play in any of the preseason games, that he's upset, that he's sought a second or third opinion on his quadriceps injury, like all the way to Jalen Rose saying that there's friction between the organization on ESPN, all the way to where we are today, which is there's obviously friction. So the question is, what's best case scenario? Andy Ibarra says Sixers Simmons is best case scenario. Chris Bennett says Kawhi wants to be a Clipper. And the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page is commenting, sorry to see you go. Thanks for partnering up. No, I appreciate you, man. And I'm going to keep all of the Spurs information flowing because it's just the start of an interesting offseason for the San Antonio Spurs. So even though I'm leaving the city and moving on, I will still remain in constant discussion with the San Antonio Spurs because this is a story that I've been close to, that I followed. Look, I came to San Antonio, and my friends always make fun of me for this. Like, I'm leaving with Kawhi, and I came in with Kawhi. But I came in right after the Spurs lost the 2011 first-round series to the Memphis Grizzlies. And that was, if you remember, like, should they blow it up? Should they start over? And what they did was, that offseason, they went and they brought in Danny Green. They made a trade at the draft and brought in Kawhi Leonard. Later on that next season, they brought in Boris Diaw. So a couple of moves, all of a sudden, the team from they need to blow it up to having another championship window. So following this team as long as I have, I've seen a team that had the low of being out in the first round of the playoffs as the 1 seed, to the high highs of winning a title, to the lows of the Ray Allen shot, to the high highs of watching Kawhi Leonard recognize unbelievable greatness, to watching Tim Duncan retire. It's been an amazing 6.5-year run covering this team. And again, I'm asking you all, what's the best case scenario for the Spurs with Kawhi? John Dyer says, best case, Kawhi for Covington, Saric, and Fultz. He's in the East, and the Spurs get solid players with one of them having the potential to be a star. Chris Bennett says, best case, get Boston's assets. Here's the question that I'm asking, right? What's the best case scenario within reason? Like, what? It doesn't seem that Boston's a legitimate player in this. And if they are, they don't seem to be pushing as far as major assets are concerned. And we'll get to some of the things that came out from Mike C. Wright of ESPN yesterday when he was on with Tom Haberstroh on his podcast. But there's certainly some interesting things, and I have some interesting comments to say about this. Now, I will say, I've been saying for the last few weeks now that in the media in San Antonio, we had been hearing for quite some time that Kawhi did want to go back home eventually to LA. Again, I'll repeat, that didn't make sense based on the perception of Kawhi Leonard. The perception that he was soft-spoken, didn't want to be a star, didn't want to deal with the media. Like, so the notion that he wanted, that his uncle and he wanted to go back to LA at some point, wanted to go home, those were all rumors we had heard. It just didn't jive with the perception that Kawhi had created. And it wasn't just a perception, it was reality. In dealing with him and dealing with the Spurs, the Spurs wouldn't make him available as often as most star players are made available throughout the NBA. There were times in which even, when they had to make him available, he was like very childish in not wanting to be made available, not wanting to speak to the media, in not making it easy on the Spurs PR team to make him available, those kinds of things. So, knowing that, it's easy to see why, even though we heard rumors that he wanted to go back to LA, they didn't seem legitimate. Because again, this is a guy that didn't want to deal with the media. It wasn't just a perception; it was reality. It was something that I saw firsthand. He didn't want to speak publicly. Didn't want to talk to the media. Didn't want to do the things that you'd consider to be, face of the franchise-esque, and especially not in a major market like LA with a major team like the Lakers, which commands that sort of attention. Javier Ruiz says Spurs need to send him to the East just for the way that Kawhi's camp has been treating the Spurs. Jonathan Sanford in the house. What's going on, man? How are you? Hit the share button if you wouldn't mind. Sharing is caring here on Phantom. I'm Ari Temkin. And we're going to spend an hour today talking about Kawhi Leonard. So whatever questions you might have, whatever comments you might have, whatever thoughts you might have, get them out. This is a fully engaged discussion between me and you. So let's make it happen. Jose Velasquez says ESPN is on the Lakers team. Interesting. Joe Garcia. And Joe Garcia does fantastic work, by the way, so make sure you're checking out Joe Garcia's great work on the Spurs as well with the Two Shots podcast and all the great stuff he's got going on there. I believe Kawhi Leonard will start the season with the Spurs. Most of the trade talks for Kawhi have stalled. The window of opportunity to get a trade done is starting to close. Interesting. If you were to hold a gun to my head and say, what do you see as the likely outcome? I think he doesn't start the season with the Spurs, but I couldn't tell you where I think he starts the season. I do think there's a point in time right now where the Spurs, and we'll hear this from Mike Wright again on the podcast, but the Spurs are asking for the moon, obviously. And this is something as we've discussed. If Kawhi Leonard is a top 3 player in the NBA, and last time we saw him play a full season, he was a top 3 player in the NBA. If he is, then you're not going to get a return. It's going to get you a top 2 player or a top, you know what I mean? So there is no player that they can get that will be sufficient based on the talent that'd be leaving town. So of course they're going to ask for a ton. Of course they're going to ask for a ton. 1, because they don't want to trade him, and 2, because if they do, they want to make sure that they're getting tons and tons of young assets in return. So it's obvious that the talks have stalled because I think the Spurs are asking for a ton. In fact, the report was with the Lakers, they want Hart, Ingram, Kuzma, 2 future first-round picks, and then 2 future swap picks. So basically 4 picks. Although 2 of them Lakers wouldn't be giving up 2 picks. So they'd be giving up 2 picks and not getting, and not getting anything for them. So the Lakers look at it and be like, no, we'll pass because, in the case of Kawhi or the case of LeBron's saying, no, don't mortgage the farm like that in order to get this guy that could potentially come here next year. As far as Philly, the reports we heard, they're not including Embiid, Simmons, or Fultz. And with Boston, it's the same kind of thing. So, and this was always my thinking, and I know that Mike Wright said this on the podcast as well. And this is sort of what a lot of people have started to say through different channels, is it seems to be a dark horse team out of the East that will probably, will come to be. Because that's the thing is, like, if you're in the East, with it being as wide open as it is, for an opportunity to get to the finals, like, it seems like you add Kawhi, you've got that opportunity to get to the NBA Finals. So, why wouldn't the Washington Wizards potentially make a push? I don't know why Philadelphia wouldn't at some point try to make that push. A team that wants to get over the top, that wants to have a pretty good idea of winning the East, will eventually probably make that leap of faith. On the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page, Longinos Campos III says, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Dallas." Longinos Campos says, "Is it true that Kawhi hid from us? Trade him to the Sixers." Yeah, I at least that's what Mike Wright is saying. Look, I'll say this on some of the comments that Mike Wright made, and we'll get to those in a moment. I'll play them for you if you haven't heard them. There was one story that he told that I had heard. I didn't hear the story about going to New York City and basically hiding from them, but I have different anecdotes and stories and things that sort of validate or verify the things that we'd heard, and that's kind of it from my vantage point, like the things that I've said over the course of the last few months and even on the radio, when I had a radio show, those were all things based on the knowledge that I had and talking with people around the organization and being there and seeing this. Jonah Wilson says, "Get rid of him. Drama's been going on too long." Yeah, I agree with that. However, you want to be able to maximize what you're going to get for him. You need to get something in, with legitimate return there. On the Ari Temkin radio page, thank you to all the commenters there as well. Steve Sosa says, "Best case scenario, Spurs get 2 slightly above average players and 3 picks. Spurs move on and get back to having a starting lineup of role players and no one big star." Sort of agree with that, but of course they're going to need a big star. And they thought that was Kawhi, and it's obviously not. If I'm the Spurs, I'm probably most interested in at least one really, really, really good young player and multiple picks. And if I'm a Spurs fan, I want the Spurs to get their hands on multiple picks because the Spurs have been unbelievable in drafting, and especially late in the draft, but especially if they can get early on picks, it'd be fantastic. Nancy Sanchez says, "I think Philly will eventually bend a little bit." I agree with you there, Nancy, and I'll get to that in a moment. I'm also broadcasting live on the Around the Association radio page, thanks to Danny Thompson, all the great work he does over there. John Dyer says, "Why do you think the San Antonio media gives the Spurs such a pass?" That's a great comment, John, and I'll tell you the exact answer for that. Because the Spurs rule this city, and they win. And so, it'd be one thing if the Spurs didn't win at the rate that they do, but because they do, there's a unbelievable credibility. Here's the deal, right? How can I explain this? In most cities, the narrative of the team is controlled by the media, right? The media who covers the team. So based on covering teams, the media will, uncover different narratives about the team. And that's the ultimate truth there, right? And that's not, they're not making up stuff. It's just the narrative is controlled by the media. Now, sometimes organizations can do their best to try to control that narrative, to try to put out there what they want the public to consume. But when the team doesn't win at the level that the Spurs have been winning at, it's very difficult for them to completely control that narrative. Here's the problem. The Spurs are walking on water from a winning standpoint in this market. So one, if you fight against the narrative they're trying to push, you're limiting your ability to get coverage. You're not gonna be able to cover the team because it's the only story in town, and they win so well that the public just trusts everything that they do because they're amazing. And why shouldn't you? R.C. Buford and Greg Popovich are amazing. They're insanely good at what they do. Insanely good at what they do. So the problem is, because they're so good, like transcendently good, there's a trust within the public, and because of that, the media then has to cover the team and has to do it in a way that sort of is within the spirit of what the Spurs want. One, because they're the only game in town, and two, because they win, you need the coverage. Does that make sense? So in most cities where a team doesn't win that well, the fans aren't just going to blindly buy whatever narrative that the team is selling them. The problem is the Spurs win so well and so often that they can basically tell the public whatever they want, and the media has to acquiesce to those wants because they have to cover this team. They have to. And in another market, like Dallas, for instance, where the Mavs need the coverage, if you're Mark Cuban and you try to control the narrative too much, you're not going to get coverage. Nobody's going to talk about you. John Cavazos says, a lot of teams don't want to give up talent for talent. That's why Kawhi is still in town. They need to dig deep. Kawhi is a talent, and if they want him, they need to pay for him. Agree with that. Millie Lev says, hate to see you leave. I believe in every word that Michelle Beadle stated about Kawhi this morning. Get rid of him unless things change between Kawhi and his family. Joe Garcia says, an interesting landing spot could be Toronto. Jonathan Sanford said, go. You mean me? Javier Ruiz says, oh, that's right. Nobody has mentioned Milwaukee. I think they'd be more deadly than Philly. I will not, John Dyer. DeMarcus Talton says, agreed. Christopher Barrera says, or Barrera, I should say, says trade Kawhi to the Celtics for Monix and a washing machine. Semi-pro reference. Carlos Martinez says, what's this with Kawhi and his former agent filing a lawsuit against Impact Sports, and that he mentioned his family is getting paid? So that's another story. Brian Elfis was Kawhi Leonard's initial agent in San Antonio, and so Kawhi and his family left them to go to Impact Sports, partially probably because his Uncle Dennis is basically Kawhi's agent. So whereas Elfis probably want to, be his agent and represent him, Impact Sports would allow Kawhi to come to their group and Dennis to basically be his agent, and then having another agent basically oversee the whole thing. And because of that, Impact's paying Kawhi's uncle and his mom, apparently, and I'm guessing they're paying his uncle so that he's his agent, even though he's not his agent. It's a weird dynamic. Impact Sports' only client is basically Kawhi, so they gave him the moon. And that's sort of why we are where we are. Let's check in on the Ari Temkin radio page. David Alejandre says, Beetle went off about Kawhi this morning. Absolutely, I saw it, and I agree. And I think, these are all things a lot of us have been saying. It's the thing that I find maybe most interesting about this entire dynamic is, you have a guy that it's unique to the Spurs, it's unique to the NBA, but also it's actually a fairly common story when you look at fame and fortune and family members being involved and thinking that they have the best interests of their family member involved, but they don't because they're basically sabotaging their careers. Like, we've seen this in music, and we've seen this in television, and we've seen this with acting, and we've even seen this in sports, maybe not to this degree, but it's certainly a different era. But, this is a common story, and I think, the thing that's most sad about it, if there's anything that's sad about it, if you could sympathize with Kawhi in any regards or any respects, is, that it's just universally known that he's getting bad advice. Like, everybody knows it except for him, because he's cocooned himself in this bubble where there's no information seemingly, coming to him that will invalidate his feelings. So he feels like he's pissed off at the Spurs. He's justified in doing it. His uncle, his agent, his family members his friends are feeding that. Like, yeah, you're right, man. Be pissed off at the Spurs. They're wrong. They've wronged you. They're just trying to spin it in the media. They're making you look bad. And it's like, everybody else is like, hello? Where's reality here? This isn't how things work in the world. You can't do the things that you've done with your uncle and then expect to be given the moon. You're not LeBron James. Even LeBron James has handled himself more graciously and with a more business savvy approach. On YouTube, Rob Iman says, I think Kawhi goes to Philly. Good morning. Hi, Rob. How are you? Kate says, if they don't trade him before the season, his trade value is going to start to drop. LA should stay out of this. They could get him for free next summer. Well, Kate, that's what they thought about Paul George. And I don't know that they lose value if they go into the season with him still on the roster. I think they have a certain value on him. There's been nobody that they've talked to that's met that asking price. And either they're going to lessen their asking price, or he's going to play throughout the season and he then justifies a larger asking price. All right, so post your comments wherever you're posting. I'll get to them. And I want to thank everybody for watching, streaming this on YouTube, on Facebook. Make sure to hit the share button. And again, I want this to just be a completely interactive discussion. Jason Taylor Maine says thank you. Thank you, Jason. Hit the share button, and I'll be thanking everybody. Also on the Around the Association radio page. I'll get to that in a moment here. Carlos Martinez on the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page says, do you think with all the news that's coming out with Kawhi is really hurting his stock and reputation? And do you think that the other 29 teams really want someone with that baggage? It's hard for me to believe that it's not hurting his stock. It's impossible for me to believe that, especially based on the stories that Mike Wright made public, and we'll get to those in a moment. Mario Drake says, let Kawhi Leonard become a Clipper. He'll be a Spur this season, but he can go into free agency next summer. Right. But I mean, there's still like the idea that he can just miss this entire next year, sit out, and then just be gifted a max contract to pay him in excess of, $30 million. Like, there's major injury concerns with him. Nobody's seen his medicals except for, and this is what Michael C. Wright talked about, Philly and the Spurs, because Philly's doctors, team doctors, are Kawhi's second opinion doctors. So nobody's seen his medicals except for the Sixers and the Spurs. Probably a reason why you think he could end up, or I think he could end up with the Sixers, or they should be the front runners in this discussion. And based on the stories that are starting to come out publicly, but are surely known to other organizations throughout the NBA, like, who's going to want to deal with Kawhi Leonard's representation? And that's the thing that almost, in my opinion, makes me feel a little bad for Kawhi, which is hard to say and hard to believe, but it's like he's so naive to just trust his uncle to represent him, and his uncle is completely and utterly sabotaging him. And it's like everybody knows it. I've never seen anything that makes somebody look so stupid, and it's so universally known, and yet he's so universally just not knowing about it. Like, it's just insane to me. Akeem Dean says if he plays and looks healthy, his value should only go up. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Hit the share button. Post your comments. Joe Garcia says Kawhi Leonard is not worth a max contract. That I agree with. In fact, Denise Lamb, who says agreed, posted about that yesterday. We talked about that yesterday during the stream. Denise, how are you? Welcome back. And yeah, I mean, it's what's amazing to me is the Spurs actually aren't going to offer him the Supermax, which is the right move. And I've been saying that all along based on all these things. But they're not actually going to offer him a max contract. And given the same circumstance, literally 29 other teams would be offering him a max contract, a Supermax. Literally every other team in the NBA, given the same circumstance, would offer him that Supermax. And that's why, okay, the Spurs have ridiculous balls to hold out on that. But two, because like the Spurs, The Spurs as a franchise have been around for 50 years. They've missed the playoffs 5 times. It's something I've discussed a lot. 5 times in 50 years they've missed the playoffs. The Spurs look at this and they say, there is no one player that's bigger than this franchise. There is no one player that's bigger than this franchise. And that's, everybody that wants to be the Spurs, and they'll hire former coaches and they'll bring in former assistants, and everybody wants a little bit of what the Spurs are in order to try to duplicate their success. And there's so many things that are just really hard to duplicate, and this is one of them. Like, every team in the NBA is beholden to star players, because if you don't have a star player, you're nothing. You're nothing without a star player in the NBA. So if you're in Kawhi Leonard's situation, a lot of teams would be like, all right, that's fine. I'll take that. I will mortgage the everything. I will deal with his uncle that seems to want to control everything and make this asset, this player, self-conscious or worried about what the organization's trying to control. Like, every other organization in sports, 29 other organizations in the NBA for the most part, be like, that's a trade-off I'm willing to take because of how difficult it is to procure a star talent like him. So every other organization in sports for the most part would be like, yeah, I'll take that. Fine, I'll deal with you. I'll deal with your uncle. I don't care about that. I'll deal with that. And Spurs are like, no. We can't be dealing with your uncle anymore, who kept us out of the loop, who left us in the dark and everything. And we're not going to give you the Supermax if, one, we don't know how healthy you are, and two, you're going to hide behind your uncle who's feeding us misinformation about this whole thing and making you question us and our motives. Naveen Prabhakar says Kawhi is a good example of today's spoiled millennial. I think he's getting bad advice. I think he's trusting in the wrong person, and it's hard for me to not, given the same circumstance, who wouldn't? It's been well documented. Greg Zuniga says, what up? What up, Greg Zuniga? How are you, buddy? My feeling on this is that, Kawhi is too trusting of his uncle because his uncle is a father figure to him, and it's well documented. His father was murdered. So he's trusting in his uncle. His uncle was there before he became Kawhi Leonard, the NBA superstar. So, of course, he has faith and trust in his uncle. It just sucks that his uncle is sabotaging his career in this capacity. And he says he wants what's in the best interest of his nephew, but it's clear that he doesn't. He wants what's in the best interest of him. Because if he wanted what's in the best interest of his nephew, he wouldn't have acted the way that he's acted basically for the last 10 months. And I think, the ultimate point here is that Kawhi always wanted to leave. Kawhi wanted to leave San Antonio. Those are rumors we heard. I didn't believe him, again, because he's not a guy that wants to speak publicly a lot. So it's a hard thing to believe. But Kawhi always wanted to leave San Antonio. And so because of that, they're looking for all these little ticky-tack. Well, Tony Parker said this, and Pop said that, and we didn't like him referencing this. And he always wanted to leave. And that's, to me, be a big boy. If you want to make $50 million a year and you want to get paid like the best players of the game and you want to be considered one of the best players of the game, then step up to the microphone and say, you know what, I had a great time at San Antonio. It was great to play for them, but I don't want to be in San Antonio anymore. I want to go home. I want to play with the Lakers. I want to play with the Clippers. And don't drag this thing out and go with the team and then leave the team and claim that you didn't like the way you were being treated. You were completely removed from the entire team dynamic this entire season. And because of that, you were removed from all of the context that Mike Wright told yesterday on the Tom Haberstroh podcast.
And what you just said sort of puts it all in perspective. I mean, you guys think about this. You go through the entire season, and Pop was asked these questions over and over and over again. And the thing was, and I don't think people realize this, Pop didn't have the answers because the whole rehab process was out of his hand. He didn't know anything. He didn't know anything. So when he's saying you'll have to ask his group, it's not like you're trying to take a shot at Kawhi and his people. It's that he doesn't know. And that's what happened. I mean, the Spurs were in the dark most of the season. I mean, dude, like some of the things that were happening was crazy. Like, and I probably shouldn't say this right now, but I'm going to say it because Kawhi is about to be out of there. I think. But, I mean, there was a point during his rehab process in New York that some of the Spurs brass went out to see him in New York. As soon as those guys arrived to the building, Kawhi's people grabbed him and sequestered him to another part of the building. So the Spurs people couldn't even see him.
Oh, man.
Now, come on. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, these are the types of things that are going on that people don't necessarily know about.
Mike Wright, that was a story I had not heard. Mike Wright on the Tom Haberstroh podcast yesterday, and this obviously became huge news that, Kawhi left the organization and went to rehab in New York, which is something the Spurs were okay with. The problem is they sent representation to see what was going on with his rehab, and there you have the story where basically as soon as they figured out the Spurs were close, they sequestered him and removed him from the situation. I mean, this is sabotaging a career for what? For what? What would be the point of keeping your nephew's team out of the loop on the rehab that was happening? What would be the point of that? Josh Bullard says trade him for Jimmy Butler, then go after Kyrie next one. So, right now, if Minnesota called up and said, we'll trade you Kawhi for Jimmy Butler straight up, the Spurs would say no because they want a ton for Kawhi Leonard. So, any of these trades that you guys are throwing my way, the Spurs right now at this juncture would say no to. Or asking you what you would say is the best case scenario for the Spurs with Kawhi Leonard. Rene De Los Santos says Kawhi will probably stay. No one has turned down a max contract, but add character and access clauses. Rene, the problem is the Spurs aren't offering him the supermax, and that's one. And two, they're not going to unless they have actual representation that they're going to deal with. They're not going to deal with this kind of thing again. Kawhi could say, "Hey, look. This was a big misunderstanding. There was a lot of upset feelings and hurt feelings, and this won't happen again." But the Spurs are not going to they're not going to give him a supermax or offer him a supermax and still let his Uncle Dennis run the show. That's the Spurs. And I talked about this yesterday. The Spurs met with Kawhi and said, "We're not going to offer you the supermax, and we need you to get rid of your uncle. We cannot be dealing with your uncle, the guy that in New York sequestered you so that we couldn't see what was going on with your rehab. Yeah, that guy. We're not going to be willing to deal with that guy any longer." Jose Luis says, stop saying they should trade him to X team. He will have to agree. That's not true. He doesn't have to agree to be traded. They can be traded to anywhere. They can literally trade him to any team they want. Now, whether or not he stays there long term, that's a different story altogether, but they can trade him anywhere they wanted. Fabian Avina says, do you think Derek White pushes DeJounte Murray for a starting point guard this year? I don't, but if he did, that'd be a great scenario for the Spurs. Denise Lamb says Uncle Dennis is in it for himself and is not looking out for the best interests for Kawhi. He's misinformed for selfish reasons. I think that's fair. Chris Bennett, family members as your agent never work out. That's fair. Norma Johnson, Spurs need a leader, and Kawhi is not a leader. He is following his uncle. Well said. There were always sort of questions about Kawhi as a leader. Kawhi is the face of the franchise. Kawhi being able to speak publicly, talk to the media, being savvy. And look, those are things that as I covered the team, I didn't see. I saw a guy that was unwilling to speak with the media, and at times when the Spurs, who protected him for so long, forced him to, even then there were instances where he was a baby about it, where he bitched about it. I don't want to do that. Let's see. Rene De Los Santos says, if you allow Kawhi to play the season, he'll show off his skills and then train him at the deadline. Should the league get involved in the situation? Does that violate the CBA? I mean, if he sits out, it does. Here's and this is something that Mike Wright talked about, and the Spurs don't want any part of that. The Spurs aren't going. If Kawhi Leonard decides to sit out next year, the Spurs aren't going to fight it. They're not, because first of all, it's going to make Kawhi look bad, and the Spurs would only look bad if they tried to force him to play against his will. And I mean, it would make Kawhi look bad, one, and two, what's the market for a guy that's a free agent who hasn't played in 2 years and refused to work with one of the most reputable franchises in sports? Javier Ruiz says, has anyone ever done this type of thing to a team before? Who could compare this to? The only comparison I've thought of is Derrick Rose, and it's not even similar because even though Rose sat out, he still stayed with the Bulls until he didn't, but that wasn't this situation. B.J. Armstrong was Derrick Rose's agent, and Reggie Rose was involved, saying bad things about the Bulls, but that's the only thing I can think of that's even a comparison. And how'd that work out for Derrick Rose? Renee De Los Santos says Charlotte has Borrego and Jordan owns his brand. Also, Jordan is so impatient that he'll give the Spurs a ransom. It's interesting you say that, Renee, because like Charlotte's always been in the back of my mind. Like the Spurs would love a guy like Kemba Walker. Charlotte has, trade pieces. We know Michael Jordan's prone to making bad decisions, as you mentioned. Kawhi's with Jordan Brand. So I certainly wonder if Charlotte becomes a dark horse team. And this is, again, and we'll hear that quote in a moment, but Mike C. Wright has alluded to the fact that, he might want the Clippers, or he might just be posturing, or he might want Philly, or look, there's probably going to be a dark horse team that wants to make a push and has the young assets to make it work, and they end up the ones with Kawhi Leonard. I don't have the audio from this, but I said before, I'd never heard the story with Kawhi in New York City, but there was a story that I did hear once about the New Orleans All-Star game. And so Kawhi was the first time it was an All-Star. And this is, to me, this story is a great window into Kawhi's personality. Like, Kawhi legitimately didn't really understand that he was a star in the NBA. So, but also a good example of how he's not really cut from the same cloth as Tim Duncan, which is fine. So Kawhi goes to his first All-Star game in New Orleans. And, by the way, hit the share button and post your comments no matter where you're watching from. But so Kawhi goes to his first All-Star game in New Orleans. And so he doesn't really know what to expect. And he shows up there, and Russell Westbrook has his own driver and car service and, is doing it up big in New Orleans. And Kawhi is like, with Russell Westbrook being part of the Jordan brand, Kawhi's like, oh, I want that stuff. If Westbrook has a driver and a car, I want that. I didn't know that was something I should do because it was the first time ever being an All-Star. So Kawhi, because of Russell Westbrook, it was like a keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing, right? So this idea that he's like Tim Duncan is completely invalidated by that story. He's instead sort of naive, ignorant to his own standing and the things that come along with that, and easily persuaded, right? Like, Russell Westbrook has a car service and a driver. I need to get one now too. Here's the other story. So he shows up in New Orleans, and all of a sudden he's demanding all these things because he sees other guys, contemporaries, that they have it. Here's the other story, and this is the one that Mike Wright told in New Orleans, told on the podcast from New Orleans, and that was, so the Kawhi was staying at the All-Star game like just a few blocks from the stadium. But it was Mardi Gras during the All-Star game in New Orleans. So 3 blocks is not like 3 blocks because lots of streets are closed, so you have to go around different places and different things. I love you too, Jose. So so basically the Spurs say, and this again, Mike C. Wright told the story. The Spurs say you should leave at this time to avoid traffic and get to the stadium. And Uncle Dennis was like, they're just trying to control you. Don't listen to them. We'll leave when we want to leave. Okay. So these Spurs were like, all right, go ahead. Sure, whatever. You know best. And they got stuck in traffic. So they were in a car heading to the stadium, and they couldn't move. They couldn't move. He couldn't go anywhere. He's going to be late. So Spurs PR members took Kawhi out of the car. Kawhi's wearing a hoodie. So he puts his hoodie on over his head. And they walked him through the Mardi Gras parade to get to the All-Star game. Because they couldn't get through a lot of streets because they were blocked, so they had to walk all the way around. And at times they had to kind of maneuver through the Mardi Gras parade on the side of it. That's what the Spurs PR team had to do with Kawhi Leonard. They had to walk him to the All-Star game in the middle of Mardi Gras to control him too much by telling him when to leave. If that story isn't so indicative of, it's like the perfect metaphor for this entire story. Like, Uncle Dennis, you've completely misread this entire situation. Like that All-Star game story where Uncle Dennis says, no, the Spurs try to control you too much. We'll leave when we want to leave your Kawhi Leonard. They get in the car. They're locked in. They're not moving. They're not going anywhere. So Spurs PR staff has to lead Kawhi Leonard through a Mardi Gras parade around different barriers to try to get him to the stadium. There's one point where they're like, to a police officer who's trying to, divert traffic one way, like, hey, this is Kawhi Leonard. We're trying to get him to the stadium. And they're like, okay, go through. And so he goes through. It's like you have no concept of reality in any instance, and you just think that they're out to get you when, like, this is literally the only, like, there is long history that suggests literally the exact opposite, that Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs care more about the individuals than anything else, more than any other franchise in all of sports. The New England Patriots are compared with the Spurs, and they treat players like assets. They don't treat them like personalities and people and human beings. Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs treat Spurs players with an unbelievable amount of respect and dignity, and speak to them like they're people and treat them like they're people. So, like with other organizations, I can understand how you might not be trustworthy. For the Spurs, they have this unbelievable history that suggests they are completely and utterly trustworthy. And it's ridiculous to expect to think anything differently. And the All-Star Game example is this unbelievable example of how wrong you are and how horribly you've misread the situation if you're Kawhi's uncle. Vanjie Bustos, how are you? Josh Briscoe watching. What's up, Josh? How are you? Paul Puente says, I read somewhere if he sits out for some reason, he violates the CBA and his year will not count, so he won't be a free agent next year. Again, yes. However, I don't think the Spurs will enforce that. I don't think the Spurs want to enforce that. Like, I think if Kawhi Leonard sits out next year, the damage will be done. Like, as if he couldn't damage his reputation even more, he will. So I just don't think the Spurs will. They won't go down that road. Dale Hart says maybe Kawhi suffers from Uncle Dennis Stockholm syndrome. Kind of, but I mean, it's sad because, again, Kawhi's father was murdered. So his uncle is his father figure. He trusts him. He trusts him to have his best interests in mind. That's the sad part here. Is it's hard to feel bad for Kawhi. I understand that. Because at some point you're 27. Grow up. But at the same time, like, his uncle was there before he was Kawhi Leonard. He trusts his uncle, and why shouldn't he? We all would, given similar circumstances. But it's like he just needs somebody to, like, shake him out of it. Like, Kawhi, look at reality here. Don't you remember the All-Star Game in New Orleans when your uncle thought we were trying to control you, and instead we had to walk you through the Mardi Gras parade to get you to the All-Star Game on time? On the Ari Temkin radio page, Julian Ogwin says, Kawhi was a good, humble man until his uncle took him over. Good luck, wherever you go, Claw. Gonna miss you, but SA don't need no drama. Well said, buddy. Frank Ramirez says it's like he has no voice. Otia Vargas says, not even close, Kawhi. You're like Tim Duncan. Not even close like Tim Duncan, I would imagine is what she's trying to say. By the way, hit the share button. Akeem Dean says that too. I kind of feel bad for Kawhi. Obviously, his family's strong influence on him, and that you're using him for their benefit and giving him bad advice. Like, Akeem, that's like, the more I think about this, the more I feel bad for Kawhi, but then you have to reconcile that with you're 27. Grow up. But yes, I also agree, Akeem. It's like, I do feel bad for him too, because given similar circumstances, we all would trust our uncle. So it's this really hard dynamic sort of toe between, like, wanting to shake him and tell him, grow up and be a man and take care of your business, but also understanding that he's a guy that wants to work specifically on basketball, exclusively on basketball. He wants somebody else to handle his business side. He's getting bad advice, and he doesn't know that he's getting bad advice because the guy that's giving him bad advice is his uncle, who he trusts. I'm Ari Temkin, live on Phantom. We are the new world order of sports media, wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope. We are broadcasting. Make sure to like the page at facebook.com/Watch Phantom. Adam Gomez in the house. What up, what up? Post your comments. Mario Jinez says, if you don't want a beer, then let him go. Yeah, but, you also, Mario Drake says, moral of the story is never have kinfolk as your age or any association of your business. Yeah, but then look at LeBron. LeBron had all of his friends that he grew up with from Akron running his business, and look at how successful they've been. So, and there are other examples of the same thing happening. So, it's tough. It's very, very tough. Yeah, Denise Lamb says Spurs organization treats players like family. Absolutely. So to be sort of in a position to where you don't trust them, it just doesn't make any sense, because their history suggests they care a ton about their players and who their players are and who they are as people. All right, here's the other anecdote from the Tom Haberstroh podcast with the great Mike
Services.
Well, contrary to, and I don't know if it's changed. I think that's what happened, is things have changed, but the Lakers are not Kawhi's preferred destination anymore. He wants to go to the Clippers, and because he doesn't want to go and be second fiddle to LeBron. That's what I was told. And I was told by somebody that would know. Oh yeah, he wants to go to the Clippers, but their assets are shit at this point.
Yeah,
that's what I was told, and I was just like, wow. And so, I have no clue. Like, I almost think that there is probably going to be a dark horse team that nobody expected come in and pull off that trade for Kawhi, because again, the Spurs demands on the trade are just, I wouldn't say unrealistic, but teams are not going to do that deal right now. They're just not.
Yeah, what do the Clippers? Because it's one thing to demand a trade, but it's another to be realistic about what that trade can look like. Like, he could say he wants to play for the Clippers now, but doesn't that kind of isn't that going to screw over his own client? Because there's not going to be a trade that works out for them. Like the Spurs, look at the Clippers roster. Who on the Clippers do the Spurs want to build their franchise around?
Exactly. That's what I was told.
Tobias Harris? No.
Right. I mean, and just from just pure basketball standpoint, the Lakers have the most attractive package to offer to me. I mean, unless Boston somehow gets in the mix and you decide to unload one or two of those young guys, which I doubt they do because they're rolling right now. So I don't know, man. Like, the Lakers have the best trade package that they could offer, but I don't know that the Lakers actually go in and offer that, because I've been told like the Lakers are.
So the report that Mike Wright quoted is basically saying, he now his preferred destination is the Clippers because he doesn't want to play in LeBron's shadow. Like, what? It's so removed from reality. It's hard for me to even understand how anybody could think it. Like, if you're Kawhi Leonard and you have problems speaking publicly, problems talking to the media, if you have issues doing that, which he does, then going to the Lakers and being LeBron's shadow is perfect. Because at the very least, you aren't LeBron. So you can be more passive. You don't have to be, the face of the so it just makes no sense. How could a guy that doesn't want to talk to the media, is very private, doesn't want to speak outwardly, doesn't want to be how could that guy also want to be a star, want to have his own team and be the guy? And it just doesn't make any sense. Brent Holmes says there's more to the story than it's being told. Yeah, he's 27. He's definitely growing, but it's upper management making this difficult for Kawhi. Upper management for the Spurs or for his uncle or what? Brent Holmes also says Kawhi will be a Spur next year. Here's the thing. I don't know. I don't even know that the Spurs don't even know. Like, the Spurs have no idea what they want to do with Kawhi. They want to keep him, and they want to get legitimate value for him, as close to legitimate value as they can get for him. But the Spurs are at a point right now where they have no idea if Kawhi Leonard's going to be here. And Renee says the Los Angeles media will eat him alive. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me. Like, when LeBron went to the Lakers, my thinking was, well, this sort of saves Kawhi. Because now he doesn't have to be the guy that has to speak publicly. And it's like, you hear, well, now he wants to go to the Clippers because he doesn't want to be in LeBron's shadow. Like, what? How far removed? Like, how do you not know yourself that? Like, how could you miss your own self that much? Kawhi has been shielded by the Spurs PR staff and not having to speak with the media. And because the market size and the success of this organization dictate that that's okay, it's okay. But that's not okay in LA. It's just insanity. It's just insanity. Fabian Avina says Kawhi to Milwaukee for Jabari Parker sign and trade. Is that what you'd want as a Spurs fan? I'm asking you your best case scenario for how this thing will end up with the Spurs. Mario Hinez says he'll end up with the Sixers. East is wide open now, and that's why I think, and this is certainly something that I've thought, and certainly something that I think Mike Wright said, but like that's why there's probably going to be a dark horse team like Charlotte, and somebody mentioned this, and that's kind of always been in the back of my mind too. Charlotte, because they've seemingly have the assets, so they can offer Kemba Walker and future picks. Like, there's going to be a team in the East that's like, all right, enough of this. I'm going to make this trade. I'm going to make it happen, and then I'm going to be in a position to win the East because Kawhi is potentially that good. But here's the other thing, and again, we learned from the Tom Haberstroh podcast with Mike Wright, but the Kawhi second opinion doctors are the 76ers team doctors. So the only people that have the medicals on Kawhi are the Spurs and the 76ers team doctors. TJ Carpenter says, what does Kawhi's voice sound like? Can you do an impersonation? Yes, I can. Hey, what's going on? I'm Kawhi Leonard. Indubitably. This is my impersonation of Kawhi Leonard. Is this good? Do you like this? Does this make sense? But I think TJ's point is well stated, right? Like, here's a guy that doesn't want to be in LeBron's shadow, and yet, like, people outside of San Antonio don't even know what his voice sounds like. Yeah, Rene De Los Santos says Kawhi and Pop will be practicing with the national team in July. That's going to be funny. It's going to be very interesting. And again, it's like, the Spurs are looking at this like, we just have to get him alone. AD Singh says spot on impression. Thank you, sir. They just want to get him alone without his uncle, and his uncle seems to not want that to happen. Does he say indubitably a lot? That's a weird word, Whisker. No, but in a H-E-B commercial that he did, he said it, which it was funny. It was a funny line, given his personality. Indubitably. So it's certainly a word that people associate with Kawhi Leonard at San Antonio. John Dyer says, I thought H-E-B made him look dumb. Turns out that's just his personality. I thought H-E-B made him look as like gregarious as he could possibly look. I thought H-E-B did a great job TJ, H-E-B is the supermarket in San Antonio. Just so we're on the same page. My son calls it ABC. He's 2.5. It's adorable. I will miss H-E-B in Dallas. I will absolutely miss H-E-B in Dallas. They have Central Market, but it's not the same. He has the personality of a street cone. Or, as was stated in one of my favorite, most underrated movies of all time, Dirty Work, he's the personality of a dead moth. Thank you, Don Rickles, R.I.P. All right, what else, people? Keep those comments coming. Otherwise, I'm just going to wrap this thing up so that TJ can have the floor. Thank you, Joe Garcia, for sharing this. Thank you, everybody, for sharing this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter. Get them all? Got them all covered? Awesome. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for being a part of this broadcast, being a part of this. This is obviously not the last we'll speak of on Kawhi Leonard. But I'm asking you, as a Spurs fan, what's the best case scenario for the Spurs with Kawhi Leonard? For me, and this is the part of the broadcast where I'm going to tell you what I believe the best case scenario to be. The best case scenario, in my opinion, for this entire situation would be Joe Hernandez says, and therefore increases his trade value, and therefore the Spurs can trade him at the trade deadline. That's best case scenario, in my opinion. Best case scenario for the Spurs is either they come to some agreement or they just understand if you're Kawhi Leonard, you've got to go in there, you've got to play, you've got to show out, you've got to show other teams that you still have it. The Spurs can then trade him, maximize trade value, and they're going to tell him, hey, we're going to trade you. Don't worry. The worst thing that could happen, you staying here, is not going to happen. You're going to be able to go wherever you want to go, but help us help you by showing your value. We'll then trade you, and you can go on and be happy, and we'll be happy because we'll finally get what we believe to be, at least close to fair market value. Joe Garcia says, Ari Temkin, the issue between the Spurs and Kawhi started last season before the start of training camp. Kawhi did not participate in the open scrimmage game. Kawhi did not come out and sit on the bench during the open scrimmage game, even though he was at the AT&T Center. Right. I mean, Kawhi never wanted to say it's San Antonio. We heard it. I didn't believe it because of his personality. I thought it's the perfect situation for him. I didn't believe it. But it's the truth. He didn't want to be here. So it's like, just be honest. Don't make up some BS about being upset about Pop or Tony Parker. Just, I don't want to be in San Antonio anymore. Is that hard? All right, well, I want to thank everybody for being a part of the broadcast. And a reminder to make plans. If you're in San Antonio, come hang out. Boom. I'm live at the Ticket Sports Pub in downtown San Antonio, not too far from this little ditty behind me, right in, a scotch away from the Alamo in downtown San Antonio. Come hang out. As you can see, we had people enjoying our broadcast during the NBA draft from the Ticket Sports Pub from outside. So come hang out. I'm going to be there. It's my final week in San Antonio before I move to Dallas. So come say hello. I'd love to meet as many people as I can. I'm working on having guests. Maybe David Chancellor, maybe Antonio Daniels. I'm not making any promises, but I'm working on having them at some point come out. But Ticket Sports Pub at noon every day next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So join us on Showtime, either streaming live on Facebook at facebook.com/Watch Phantom, or join us in person at the Ticket Sports Pub, downtown San Antonio on Houston Street. Again, thank you everybody for enjoying, for being part of this broadcast. And TJ Carpenter, noon o'clock with TJ Carpenter's coming up next, so stay tuned for that. And TJ, this marks, I believe, 901 straight shows about Kawhi Leonard.